so many parallels between our stories. It's just, Vermont's such a great place, and there's a lot of lessons that you've learned that I've learned, and sometimes went in a different direction, and our kids went to school together and sing Georgian music together. Who knew? Who knew? So Sam asked me to talk about the story of my business and my journey as an entrepreneur. And like Dory, I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And I retired last month from the staff of Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, which maybe you've heard of, maybe not. But if you haven't, you've probably heard of its front brand, which is Efficiency Vermont. I co-founded VEIC in 1986 with my partner. Again, a similarity, two people with a real passion, and that energy made a lot more happen than I think it would have otherwise. I started a lot of other nonprofits and co-ops and one for-profit company in my life that I worked for, but I'm going to talk about VEIC today. Blair and I created VEIC with the mission of reducing the cost of energy to consumers, particularly low-income people and the entities that serve them. So I served as the director of VEIC for 22 years, and then grew it from a staff of 2 to 170, and grew it from annual revenues of 8,000 to about 40 or 50 million. I don't remember which. Once it got past $1 million, I was kind of blown away. Now I think it's about 90. And one of the decisions I was proudest of was knowing when to step out of the executive director role. Really important thing to know. I had learned everything I'd learned by the seat of my pants and by making mistakes and breaking laws and, doing a lot of things that I didn't know were wrong or right. And so it was time to bring in somebody who could really take what we had built and grow it so that it could have greater impact. Because as a mission-driven nonprofit, it's all about the impact. More impact, the better. So I was thinking about, okay, why did I start a business? Really, I don't like to follow other people's rules. That's really a confession. And I was not sure I would ever really be good at trying to find a job. I was expelled from high school for profanity and insubordination. But it was at the end of the year, so I got into college. It took me 7 colleges to put together an undergraduate degree, and that was it. I noticed, Dory, one of the lessons that I'm going to get to is education is a whole lot less important than talent and skill. But I started it because climate change, as I understood it 40 years ago, was some serious shit, and it really scared me. The idea that we could be having such a dramatic impact on the planet, and we wouldn't know it and we wouldn't see it for years and years and years was terrifying. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and it just was really frightening. The consequences were bigger and scarier than anything I could imagine. And we also couldn't find anyone else doing exactly what we thought needed to be done. We defined the issues that we thought needed to be addressed, which was to deal with global warming right away, to understand why people weren't embracing efficiency and renewables, and then to figure out what it is that they needed and give it to them, provide it to them so that they could. So that was really the foundation of Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. What we did was work really hard to understand what the barriers were. And through hundreds of conversations, got to the point where we identified the major barriers to be the lack of access to trustworthy information, the lack of access to capital, and the hassle factor, the lack of an entity that you could go to get everything done at once, a one-stop shop. And that's really what drove how we grew VEIC. We worked hard to understand these barriers. We talked to everyone we knew who was remotely interested or thinking about this and asked them, all the questions we could, and then ask them who else we should talk to that they knew that we hadn't talked to yet. And it's really important because I've asked people at work sometimes to look at researching a project, and they Google it. It's not the same. It's just not the same. So just as important as the mission was how we operated as a business. And that gets to the what did you call it? The heart, the passion, and the making time for the important stuff. I was 9 months pregnant when we started VEIC, and I was literally moving from one house to another house. And so I can't tell you how important flexibility was. And it turns out I wasn't alone. Flexibility is just probably, if there is one thing that makes people comfortable and successful, a successful work environment, it's flexibility. I was going to talk to somebody about something, and I went and talked to the women in our office who are engineers. The first one who's in the room here, Eveline. And now we have a staff of engineers. And I said, what's the most important thing? What's the thing that's made it work for you? And every single person said flexibility, just right off the bat. So it was important that I had the flexibility I needed, and that the business, which was me, so that was easy, was to trust me to act like a grown-up and do my job. And that I wanted to extend the business so that all employees would have that same opportunity as we grew. So, and then I just have I told you in the beginning, the profanity and insubordination, and I don't like finding other jobs, and I don't like finding other rules, following other rules. You mentioned dress codes, which is my final frontier, or my last stand. I've recently left VEIC, and they said, well, what would you like to continue? And I said, I've always said, as long as I'm here, no dress code, because people are adults and they know how to dress. So who do they call when they have to do something else other than go to work? Like, go for jury duty or go to a wedding. They know. We don't need dress codes. We need dress codes for those 2 or 3 people who really don't get it. And that's a personal issue, and you need to talk to them. But, so I said, it would make me really, really happy if we never then had a dress code, even after I leave. Because I was thrown out for the insubordination was, among other things, wearing pants to school before girls were allowed to wear pants to school. Yeah, 1969, the Supreme Court ruled. So since we started the business, VEIC has grown in many directions in response to the environment, to technology, to understanding the workplace, and lots of other things. We started out doing really on the ground, going door to door and knocking on doors and screwing in light bulbs and insulating water heaters in people's homes. We then grew that into that. We grew from that experience of actually running programs to consulting and designing programs in 25 states and 6 or 8 countries. And all along the way, we were advocates for legislation and for policy that was important to the mission. And we then created the concept of an efficiency utility, which is now, if you are familiar with Efficiency Vermont, it's the first one in the country. And we built it from the ground up. And after 15 years of thinking we knew what we were doing, we decided to open offices and open a similar kind of efficiency utility in Washington, D.C. and in Ohio in 2011. So, what are my lessons? This was really fun. What are the lessons that I've learned? I didn't put these in an order, so we can talk about them maybe in the Q&A, but ask questions. Always ask questions. If you ask why 5 times, you'll get to the answer. And I have so often in my life just said, asked a question, gotten the answer, and walked away and realized that's not the answer. That's not what I was looking for. That doesn't tell me why. So some person, maybe a business guru, talks about asking why 5 times. Another one is converse, not convince. The way that we learn is to go into a situation and talk with other people and possibly come out with a solution or a new way of doing things that we hadn't thought of when we came in. But if you come in with an answer and your job is to convince people, that's never going to happen. This is really out of order, but I'm going to keep going. Words matter. Gender-related words and lots of other words, they matter. Assume the best intentions. Assume people will act like adults. Make the hard decisions. First by, in my opinion, getting input from people from not just people that you trust, from everyone that is important, that you need to hear from. Get input from them, and then make a decision. And the most important thing is to explain why. I think that's been one of the most discouraging things that happens when we forget to do that at VEIC. Is it's really disempowering. It's really just doesn't work. It doesn't build trust. So explain why. Respect the law because you want to stay in business. I didn't, but I confessed that I was doing employment, the way we did our employment, really wrong for the first little while. And, well, in a few different ways. One of them, which was someone said, that could be called embezzling. And the other one was just really violating labor laws because I didn't know better. We just paid everybody for every hour they worked. So I was talking last year at a meeting like this, and there was someone from the Department of Labor, and I said, just cover your ears for a minute in case the statute of limitations has not run out on this. But we figured it out, and then we started doing it right. So respect the law. But be sure that the policies and the procedures and the way that you do things doesn't get in your own way. Because I think that's, that I tell people at work, we have to respect the law or find out and fix it. We have to be very scrupulously in line with our contracts, but contracts can be changed. So at a point where you're renegotiating a contract, you can say, we can do this a better way. And then there's the third thing, which is, we've always done it that way. And that's the one to be really careful of, to be aware of, because we're in our own way doing that if we're doing that. So encouraging other ways to look for ways to do things better and more creatively and support that. I talk about at work with introductions about the concept of Shoshin, which I think is a Zen concept, which is that it's called beginner's eyes. So any employee, whether they've been there for a month or 30 years, has a better perspective today than they will tomorrow. And especially the ones that have been there for a week or a month or a year. They can see things in a way that they'll never be as fresh again, their eyes. Let's see. One of the things I learned that was very interesting was that I'm a fiscal conservative. I had no idea I was a conservative in any way, but we didn't borrow money to grow. And so I didn't realize that was unusual, and I'm sure that it doesn't have to happen that way always, but we really only grew when we had the resources to grow. Don't take no for an answer. Be tenacious. There are so many ways that people are going to say no, and all you have to do is really dig in and find a way to get to yes, just going around. Hire for experience and talent, not education. Don't be afraid to hire people who are smarter than you, because that's how you can grow, and that's how you develop the next leaders. Celebrate exemplars. So those are from just the perspective of leaving VEIC very recently, and what have I learned? That's what I've learned. It's summarized in 12 bullet points. A little embarrassing maybe, but, put it in there. And Sam also asked us to think about how our community can help female founders. So I thought about that some. And I think it's really important to recognize the unique perspective and values that women bring to the workplace. They're different. They're better in a lot of ways, not always, but bring to the workplace and the world. Support each other by networking opportunities on a regular basis. I know that some of those are formal and some are informal. If you're not part of one, start one. It's not that hard. Find other people who are doing similar things, and they'd probably love to get together once a month and talk about their issues and your issues. Hire lots of women. One's a token, two can kind of support each other, and three is a movement. Three is a force. And it makes a really big difference. And it also brings more women in. And maybe we could create a city or statewide resource to identify women who might be interested in our jobs, and we might be interested in, kind of like those binders that Mitt Romney used to talk about. Let's make those binders. As a woman, I think trust your gut. That was really hard for me. I did a whole, what's that called? A podcast, right? With Tiff Bloomley on trusting your gut. But use other people that you respect as a sounding board, because you don't want to just be off on your own, but trust your gut, because in most cases it's really telling you the right thing. Provide a flexible work environment, celebrate women exemplars, and speak up. Speak up's the one I'd say more than anything. Speak up and help other people speak up. Thank you.